A Birthday Story is the 7th episode of the 2nd season of The Middle. This is directed by Ken Whittingham, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And it's a really solid episode, and one of the great things about having a terrible memory is that I couldn't remember Brick's birthday story. And I'll talk more about that in a moment, but as I said, there will be spoilers, so I will explain what the story is. The other part of the narrative, though, I also really enjoyed. Axel is working at the movie theatre, and I love this for two reasons. One, I just love to see him working, getting out there, doing something productive. And the other reason is because of his attitude towards his boss. Initially, he's very attracted to his boss. In fact, arguably, he's always attracted to his boss. She's very conventionally attractive, and Axel initially likes spending time with her. But then he realises she's not intelligent, and that's putting it mildly. And then on the Saturday, Axel has to work. He's on his own. She's 3 hours late. Nothing is getting done. She doesn't know how to do her job. And the next thing we know, the final scene at the movie theatre, raccoons have gotten into the cupboard, the candy cabinet, and I loved Axel's response because she wanted Axel to sort out the problem for her. Her name's Kasey. I don't know if I mentioned that. She's played by Sarah Wright. And Kasey wanted Axel to rectify everything, and she even said to him, "I'll go out with you." No, Axel's not having it. He told her that actually maybe she should get into trouble for a change, and he's not going to go out with her just to, solve the problem for her. And I rather enjoyed that. I loved his response. And then he has this lovely heart-to-heart with Mike. Well, maybe heart-to-heart's too strong a term, but he has a pleasant conversation with Mike about how he's confused that he's attracted to her and always thinks about her, but hates being around her. And Mike pointed out that Axel learned the important lesson that you need more than looks in life, and you need more than just a pretty face. And it's a nice bit of maturity for Axel. So I really thoroughly enjoyed that part of the narrative, and I loved the main part as well. Brick's birthday is on Saturday. Well, his party's on Saturday, and this year he wants to hear the story of the day he was born. And they're constantly putting it off. When Brick asks this, Frankie, she hesitates, and then in her fluster, she walks into the screen door. Clearly, there's a secret they're not telling him. And Sue's blowing up a balloon, and Brick mentions his birthday, the day he was born, and Sue inhales the balloon air. It doesn't sound funny when I say it, but it definitely was. And Sue ends up locking him in her closet to avoid having to tell him the story. And we forget about it temporarily as we have Brick's birthday party, which I have to say is my kind of party. They start with some quiet reading, and then they have a trip to the library. And honestly, it was delightful. It was really, really sweet. And then Brick says he didn't get the thing he wished for when he blew out the candles. He wanted the story of his birth. And I've only just realised I don't know the story of my birth. I've never really cared to ask. I don't know if that's strange. Do most people know their birth stories? Maybe it's just me. And they decide, okay, fine, we'll tell you. And Frankie tells this very convincing story. And I will say, as she was telling it, it's a story of Mike not wanting to pay for the parking meter and then fainting when he got to the delivery room. I believed it, but also something in my mind was saying that's not the true story. But I don't know if it's obvious or if I could remember that part. I haven't seen this episode in about 10, 11, maybe 12 years. So maybe I could remember that wasn't the true story. I don't know. If you watch this for the first time, I'd love to know if that was obvious, that wasn't the true story. But we do find out the true story because Axel comes home from his shift and Brick says, "Hey, I got to hear the story of my birth." And Axel mentions the Fergusons, obviously thinking Brick was told the true story. And of course, Brick realises then that wasn't the true story. And we find out the story. And I have to say it was more shocking than I expected. Because Frankie goes into labour, she goes to the hospital, and they're taken to this private suite. And they think they're the Fergusons. Presumably the Fergusons are people with a lot more money who can afford a private room for childbirth. And Frankie decides they're not going to correct them. And they would have gotten away with it, except Brick goes off to get his heel prick test, and the nurse asks Mike if he'd like to come along and watch, which I have to say is not something that sounds like a pleasant thing to watch, but he goes along and he has his back turned, watching a television through the window, and Brick is put into the little cot, and the nurse tells him, "You can take the baby back now." And he turns around and there are two babies. One is marked with Ferguson, and the other is marked with Ferguson. Presumably the real Fergusons who are somewhere else in the hospital. And Mike doesn't know which baby it is. So he picks one, and Frankie, in her drugged up state, doesn't know it's not Brick either. And that seemed bad enough, and I kind of thought, all right, okay, the babies were switched. The other family would find out as well. I think that's an important thing to note as well. Brick was outraged that Frankie and Mike didn't know that he wasn't Brick, but the Fergusons didn't know that their baby wasn't Blake either. So, to be fair, neither sets of parents realised that the baby wasn't theirs. And I thought, okay, they'll find out before they leave the hospital, and then they'll find out that they weren't meant to have that room, and it would be chaotic. No, they had the baby for a month, give or take a day. I can't even imagine. I mean, there are stories of babies being accidentally swapped at birth and living with the wrong parents for a certain amount of time. There are stories of some people not finding out for years and years, which must be a really difficult experience. So I guess a month is fortunate. We didn't really find out how they found out, but eventually they did. And Brick was outraged. I guess understandably, I don't know how I'd feel in Brick's position, because on the one hand, newborn babies often do look alike. Some of them don't. Sometimes babies have very distinguishing features. Sometimes they just look a lot alike, and I guess that was the case for Blake and Brick. Brick, Heck, and Blake Ferguson. And I guess it just took them a month to realise, because once Frankie got out of her drugged up state and Mike got more used to the baby, they just assumed that this was their baby, and that's what he looked like. I wonder if that means their baby photos for the first month are pictures of Blake. I wonder if they kept any baby photos they took of Blake. That would be a bit strange. I don't know. I genuinely don't know how I'd feel in Brick. No wonder it's confusing. Brick's situation. It would be quite strange. So it was interesting to see Brick's response, and I think Brick coming around at the end and saying that actually he has the coolest birthday story was definitely finding a silver lining. After all, being with the wrong family for a month doesn't seem to have done him any harm. We say that knowing that Brick whispers to himself, has social problems. Maybe it did. Let's not dwell on that. Either way, I liked how it resolved itself. Brick also handed over a list of additional birthday gifts he wanted, and also told Frankie and Mike some things he'd maybe broken around the house, because he forgave them, so they're going to have to forgive him. Nice bit of leverage there. Really enjoyed this episode. Really glad that I couldn't remember what Brick's birthday story was, because it made it so exciting, and I did not see that coming. Really thoroughly enjoyed it. A Birthday Story is a really fantastic episode of The Middle.